Hello and welcome to Analysis. Violence between Christians and Muslims has left over 1,000 dead in the Central African Republic. Many commentators are saying that the state is in meltdown. The Central African Republic is a former French colony which gained independence in 1960. But the former colonial power has maintained armed forces in the country. France has repeatedly intervened militarily since independence and is doing so again today. We're going to look behind the current conflict at the roots of the instability in the Central African Republic. With me in the studio is James Schneider, who's editor at Think Africa Press. And on the line, we're joined by Lydia Boca from the Strategico think tank and freelance journalist Tende Marama. But first, let's take a look at this report.
The party is over. The controversial words of the interim president of the Central African Republic this week. After months of violence that has seen over 1,000 people killed and 1 million displaced, the country's president and prime minister were forced to step down.
All of the armed elements are warning the anti-Balaka and Seleka that the holiday is over. To the forces of order, I order you to shoot to kill at all those disturbing the public order so that peace can reign in this country. The break is finished.
The past year has seen an upsurge in violence between two militia groups, the anti-Balaka, a Christian militia, and the mostly Muslim Seleka group, after the country's first Muslim president, Michel Dotadilla, came to power in a coup last March. Despite some reports saying that a degree of calm has returned to the capital Bangui, with Christians celebrating in the streets, tensions remained, with the possibility of increased brutality in the days to come.
We're going to stay here for all those Muslims who came in front of us. We're going to massacre them. After what they have done to us, we've had enough.
Chilling footage of a Christian man murdering and then eating a Muslim man's leg in a self-proclaimed revenge attack emerged this week. Whilst 37 people were killed in clashes with Seleka rebels as peacekeeping forces tried to contain the violence. Fears of mass atrocities and genocide echoing the Rwandan genocide of the 90s has spurred an international response spearheaded by 1,600 French troops, backed by 4,000 from African forces. However, there have been fears that the amount of peacekeeping troops on the ground may not be enough to contain the violence that is likely to ensue. A president will be appointed within the next 2 weeks, and people are hopeful that this will bring a transition into peace.
We are satisfied, we got what we wanted, and we are really happy about his departure. As for what's coming next, we wait for a new president, a new government to be put in place, for peace to return, that's all.
As violence continues on the Western Front, an opportunist emerged recognising the chance to seize power during the transition. The Central African Republic could see itself entering a new period of volatility, even deadlier than the last. Tayana Simons, Islam Channel.
So James, looking at that report, I mean, all the headlines are about intercommunal conflict, about Christians versus Muslims. Is there a larger picture that we should be looking at here?
Yeah, I think there is, and whilst obviously there is lots of intercommunal violence going on and people are killing each other on the basis of their religion, that's not how this has started. And I think that a lot of the kind of reporting and narratives about it have amplified the potential for violence. I mean, it originally is a political struggle where a rebel alliance overthrew the president who himself was, autocratic and dictatorial. And at the time, it wasn't being framed as, the Muslim rebels are overthrowing the Christian president. It wasn't like that at all. And I think there's, you have to recognise that there is lots of intercommunal violence taking place, but also that if you just view it through that prism, solving the kind of violence and solving the kind of underlying issues won't happen.
Okay. Liddy, let me bring you in on the conversation. What do you think is fundamentally at stake here? Do you think that the way that this is being portrayed is too simplistic?
Yes, definitely. I share James's view. It started as a political struggle, and some dark forces used that as an opportunity, that being a Muslim president coming to power, being Jotodia by force, and they used that to pit the communities against each other. There have been decades of violence and fighting in CAR, and religion was never an issue. It's just something that is new, that people are using now for their own interest, and we're going to find out who, I'm sure, this year.
Let me just ask you a little bit more about that, because, you know, it's being portrayed as a kind of failing state or failed state. But, I mean, there's a certain amount to say that it never reached stability in the first place.
It did at some point with the first president. From the moment Bokassa came, I think this is when instability really started. There was a brief stability.
So we're talking about back in the 60s and 70s now.
70s,
yeah.
Yes. And then there was it was a democracy at some point with Patasse, who was toppled by Bozize with the help of Chad. It's a volatile region. We have to look at the regional context with Sudan and Chad to understand what's going on there.
Which are the bordering countries.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, let me bring Tendai in here. Welcome to the programme. What's your take about the fundamental roots of the instability here? I mean, our previous two guests have been saying that it runs a lot further back than the immediate conflicts.
Yes, certainly, because this is a situation that we've been developing since December 2012. And essentially, when the Seleka rebellion rose up, it was against President Francois Bozize at the time, who at the time had neglected the promises that he had made to the Seleka fighters, and also they themselves were frustrated and were fighting back against that. So essentially, they rose up against that president and then overthrew him. But then in overthrowing him, there was a period of anarchy and lawlessness that then continued, and that is what then sparked up this current conflict that is between a group, the Anti-Balaka, who present themselves as a Christian group, but they are not necessarily that. It's a group that is composed of different militias that all have different interests, and some of them are political, and the main groups within the Anti-Balaka have a political agenda. And I think that is essentially what gets lost in this current narrative at the moment.
Okay, James, you know, both Tendai and Lydia there have been referring to the sort of longer trajectory of the country's history. How would you frame it in those terms? Independence in 1960. What effect has the conditions under which independence was reached had on the current conflicts?
I mean, it's definitely important in terms of background. So the Central African Republic, like a great number of other former French colonies, has suffered from a particular system of neocolonialism, a particular French system of neocolonialism, which combines military support for friendly dictators along with deep-rooted institutional corruption, both in those countries and funneling money back to France, often for control of resources and land. So, I mean, part of the reason why the CAR is in a mess as the kind of background issue is rooted in that. But in the present, the present fighting isn't really over. It's not like one side is being pro or anti-French. There isn't a kind of anti-imperial or anything else element to it. At the moment, what we've got is a kind of struggle for power in a state that, as you say, has never really been able to form as a state that has never really been able to have full independence. And that background amplifies the problem, but you can't just draw a straight line from the really unpleasant legacy of colonialism and neocolonialism in the Central African Republic to the current crisis.
Lydia, let me just ask you that question. How much weight would you place on the continued role of France here, the conditions under which independence came, and, as we said in the introduction, repeated military intervention in the country?
I think it plays an important role, but it's fading now with the new administration in France, with Hollande saying that it's the end of France-Afrique. I think France was reluctantly dragged back into the Central African Republic and in Mali recently for various reasons. So it played a role, but I think it's not that important anymore.
Okay, Tendai, how would you weight this? What kind of importance would you attach to the continued French role here?
Okay, Well, I don't know. I would take a different view because, right now, even though the French presence is welcome, there are still a lot of memories that are associated with French interference in Central African politics. So, for example, you get some generals within the Seleka that have been able to exploit this amongst their own groups, and in their complaints or in their anger towards the French, this then gets drummed up and it's used as a rallying point. There's also been some minor protests as well in Bangui with residents from majority Muslim areas complaining about French presence on the soil and this being seen as a form of neo-imperialism. But I think, in my opinion, looking at the role of the French in this particular episode in the Central African Republic's long history and interaction with the French, I would say that I think we're seeing a different kind of Francafrique and a different kind of engagement of the French with Africa, and also to compare again with the French intervention in Mali as well. So I would say that we see there's been, I think the French are trying to set a different tone, whereas before some previous French presidents colluded with dictators. We actually see in this scenario Francois Hollande actually taking a different step, and he's actually trying to usher in something that is more democratic and a more transparent form of government. So, I would say it's a little bit different.
Okay, well, we'll return in the second part of the programme to the role that Francois Hollande and the French are playing there. But in the meantime, James, you were saying you can't draw a straight line from the kind of colonial experience through today. So what are the factors that you think have emerged since then, or are specific to the post-colonial period that are at the roots of this?
Well, specific to this particular crisis. Well, so you've had violence and rebellions and instability that has never really ceased throughout the whole country. I mean, it's been, generally speaking, quite localised. It's in the country's northeast. And so the kind of background of potential for violence and also, a struggle for state power is there. I mean, Francois Bozize himself took power by force, and this is the kind of background to work out what the incentives are for each of the current actors, because they know that they can claim additional power and money by force. And I think the money aspect is important. So the Seleka alliance, this rebel alliance that overthrew the president in March of last year, had mercenaries and other people that they'd drawn to it, saying that we're going to basically, when we win, we'll give you a load of money. And part of the reason for the kind of real amplification of violence after they took power was in part the non-payment from these kind of basically bandits and mercenaries and so on. And saying mercenaries doesn't necessarily mean that they're from abroad. There's a big there's a big attempt to try to say that anybody from the kind of northeast of the country is either Sudanese or Chadian, which is problematic itself. But the money taps being turned off meant that they went and tried to get get things themselves through violence, and it's how that has then been interpreted by local communities, which has led to this Muslim-Christian dynamic, because the Seleka are majority Muslim. One of the ways in which it was interpreted, particularly in the kind of west and northwest of the country, which is where Francois Bozize was from, was trying to use this idea that they are Muslim and they're attacking you for that reason.
And some commentators have said that this could be the beginning of a kind of Rwandan scale of genocide. Do you think it could end up there, or is that overstatement?
It's a real overstatement, and I mean that's not to say it's not a really bad situation, but Rwanda was extremely extremely different. You have state power, which is involved in the organised and had been planned for a while beforehand, elimination of a group of people based on their ethnic identity. The situation in the CAR is significantly more anarchic, it's significantly less planned, it's significantly less centralised. So I don't think that's there. And also the kind of the basis for the particular intercommunal hatreds that are being seen in many parts of the Central African Republic are much newer, much more shallow, and much less long-lasting than those in Rwanda. So I think really when people are saying, oh, it's Rwanda, it's a way for people to try to get extra interest in the Central African Republic. It's actually analytically pretty useless.
Liddy, do you agree with that the Rwanda comparison is more confusing than helpful?
I totally agree. It's not a genocide. A genocide is organized by state means. It's something planned and centralized. And here you have two communities, not even two communities. You have people from different communities not representing the views of those communities, committing murder on the other communities. This is what's going on. But coming back to the money issue and the Seleka, which is a loose alliance, I think it rose to power because of money. Really, it didn't have high political interests. There was money due to a number of mercenaries, as James said, who belonged to Seleka, and this is why they organized themselves and went that far. And if I may also make a comment about France-Afrique, as Tendai said, it's definitely a different kind of France-Afrique. But we have to remember that Bouzize, before he fell, begged France to come to his rescue, the way Bokassa did in the late 70s. It was really a shame. And France didn't come to his rescue, so we see a turning point there.
Okay, I'm just going to have to stop you there because we are going to return to the question of France's participation in the second half of the programme, but we've run out of time in this half. But come back after the break and we'll be following the events in the Central African Republic with our team of commentators. Thanks very much.